She was already at the altar when he walked in. The doors didn't bang open, there was no dramatic entrance, no shouting, no running. He simply appeared at the back of the church, tall, still, wearing a dark suit with no tie. And when his eyes found hers through the white veil, the entire room seemed to lose oxygen. The pastor stopped speaking. The groom turned. And Adaeze Okafor, standing at the altar in a dress that didn't feel like hers, felt her knees begin to tremble. Because Han Jae-won, the most dangerous man she had ever loved, the man she had spent 4 months trying to forget, the man whose child was currently growing quietly inside her, had just walked into her wedding. And he looked calm. That was the terrifying part. He wasn't angry, he wasn't desperate. He just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes and said, in a voice so quiet it somehow carried across the entire church, "Stop the wedding." 2 words. No explanation, no apology, no drama. Just those 2 words, delivered like he was simply correcting something that had gone wrong. Like he had all the authority in the world to stand in that building and say exactly that. Nobody moved. Because in Seoul, when Han Jae-won spoke, people didn't move until he told them to. Let's go back to where this really began. 4 months earlier. Adaeze had arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a research visa, and a stubbornness that her mother called pride and her father called survival. She was 28 years old, a biochemist from Enugu, Nigeria, who had won a competitive fellowship at Yonsei University. She spoke 3 languages. She had published 2 papers before the age of 25. She had done everything right, taken every correct step, and still life had found a way to make the ground unstable beneath her feet. Her father was sick, stage 3. The money was not enough. The research stipend was decent by Nigerian standards, but barely survivable in Seoul. She shared a tiny apartment in Mapo-gu with 2 other international students, ate instant noodles 4 nights a week, and sent 30% of every paycheck home without thinking twice. She was tired, but she would never say so out loud. That was Adaeze. She carried weight the way mountains carried snow. Silently, completely. Until the season changed and something broke. The night she met Jae-won, she wasn't supposed to be out. Her labmate Priya had dragged her to a rooftop bar in Itaewon to celebrate a minor publication win. Adaeze had gone wearing jeans and a yellow top, no makeup, hair natural and high. She had planned to stay for 1 drink and leave within the hour, but the night had other plans. She had stepped away from the noise to stand at the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the city lights, trying to remember why she was still here, still fighting, still pushing, when someone stepped up beside her. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out at the same view. She glanced at him once, sharp jaw, expensive suit, an energy around him that felt like a locked room. Then she looked away. "You look like someone who is working very hard not to feel something," he said. His English was precise, almost too clean, like he had learned it from books rather than conversations. She turned to him slowly. "Excuse me?" "I'm not being rude," he said, still looking at the city. "I recognize it. I do the same thing." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. And somehow, that was the beginning. His name, she found out later, was not something he offered freely. That night he just said, Jae-won. No title, no family name, nothing else. He asked about her research. He actually listened. He asked follow-up questions that proved he had been paying attention, which was already more than most men had ever given her. When she mentioned her father's illness and the financial strain without meaning to, it slipped out between drinks. He didn't offer pity. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," with that hollow tone that people used when they didn't know what else to say. He said, "What does he need?" Simple, direct, like it was already a problem with a solution they just hadn't found yet. "I didn't come here for charity," she said immediately, her spine straightening. "I know," he said. "That's not what I'm offering." She went home that night thinking about him more than she wanted to. She saw him again 3 days later, and then again the week after that. He always seemed to know where she would be, which should have alarmed her more than it did. Later, she would understand that it wasn't coincidence, that Han Jae-won did very little by accident. But in those early weeks, she was too distracted by how it felt to be seen by him. He wasn't warm, exactly. He didn't smile easily or speak carelessly. He was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like every word he chose to say had survived some internal selection process before it was allowed to leave his mouth. But when he focused on her, really focused with those dark eyes that held everything and gave nothing, she felt like the only person in the world who existed. She knew something was different about him. He moved through Seoul like someone who owned invisible pieces of it. People made room for him without being asked. Restaurants had his table ready before he arrived. Once, while they were walking near Gangnam, 2 men in black suits appeared from nowhere, whispered something in Korean, and he answered with 2 words that made them disappear. When she asked him what his work was, he paused. "I manage things," he said. "What kinds of things?" "The kinds that other people can't manage themselves." She should have pressed harder. She didn't, because by that point she was already in trouble. By that point she was already spending evenings with him on his private penthouse terrace, eating food he had somehow arranged to be delivered from a Nigerian restaurant in Itaewon, jollof rice, egusi soup, puff puff, and watching him try the food with a focused seriousness that made her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed in years. "You don't have to eat it if you don't like it," she said. "I do like it," he said, and took another spoonful of egusi. "You're lying." "I don't lie," he said simply, and somehow she believed him, even though she had known him for exactly 3 weeks. It was the soup that undid her. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her after, like she was something he hadn't expected to find and wasn't sure what to do with. Or maybe it was just that she had been alone for so long, carrying so much, and he had appeared at exactly the moment her arms were getting tired. Whatever it was, she fell, quietly, completely, the way she did everything. And for 6 weeks, she was the happiest she had been in years. Then she found out who Han Jae-won really was. Not from him. Never from him. From a news alert on her phone, a brief article buried in a Korean business news site that Priya, who read Korean fluently, translated for her over breakfast with wide eyes. Han Jae-won, heir to the Han organization. The legitimate side was pharmaceutical distribution and real estate. The side that people whispered about, that journalists approached carefully and politicians avoided, was something older and darker. His grandfather had built networks in the post-war years. His father had refined them, and Jae-won had inherited everything, including the power, the danger, and the enemies. He was not just wealthy. He was the kind of powerful that lived outside the rules entirely. She confronted him that evening. She told him she knew. She told him she wanted the truth, all of it. And he sat across from her with that same stillness he always carried and gave it to her, in clean, factual sentences, without asking for her forgiveness or her understanding. "I am not a good man," he said at the end, But I have not lied to you. Not once. She stared at him for a long time. Then she stood up, picked up her bag, and left. He didn't stop her. For 2 weeks, she heard nothing. Then she found out she was pregnant. Comment where you are watching from right now, because this is where everything changes. She sat on the bathroom floor of her tiny Mapo-gu apartment for 40 minutes after the test showed positive. Then she stood up, washed her face, and made a decision. She would not tell him. It wasn't simple stubbornness. She had thought it through, really thought it through, the way she thought through everything. His world was dangerous. She had done her research now, the proper kind. The Han organization was tied to things that left people broken or dead. A child in that orbit was not a gift. It was a target. And she had already watched her father's body betray him. She would not bring a child into a world where danger came pre-packaged with the man who loved you. So she would handle it herself, like she always handled everything. Except that handling it alone in Seoul, pregnant, with a sick father in Nigeria, and a research visa that was tied to her performance at the university, turned out to be more than even Adaeze could carry. That was when Dominic found her. Dominic Choi was Korean-Nigerian, half and half, raised between Lagos and Busan, smooth in both worlds. He was charming in the way that people who grew up learning to fit in everywhere learn to be, effortlessly, dangerously. He had come to Seoul 6 months earlier for business, he said. He had run into her at the university during a guest lecture and recognized the particular exhaustion of someone drowning with no one watching. He had offered her a lifeline. "Marry me," he said, 3 weeks after they met. "It's a practical arrangement," he said. "You get stability, financial support, a legal path to stay in Korea if you choose, and your child has a name."
"I travel for business constantly. I won't interfere in your life. You won't have to love me. Just say yes." She knew it was desperate. She knew in some part of herself she was trying to silence that it was wrong, that the child she was carrying deserved better than a practical arrangement, that she deserved better. But her father's medical bills had just doubled, and her research results had hit a 6-week dead end. And every morning she was waking up sick, fighting her own body, and there was no one, not one person, she felt she could fall apart in front of. So she said yes. The wedding was small, a private venue in Itaewon, 50 guests, white dress, expensive flowers, everything arranged so quickly it felt like a fever dream. She didn't tell Jae-won. She didn't think he would ever know. She forgot somehow that Han Jae-won knew everything that happened in Seoul before it happened to other people. And so here they were. She was at the altar. He was at the back of the church. And Dominic, the man she was about to marry, had gone very, very still in a way that Adaeze had never seen before. "Jae-won," Dominic said. His voice was careful, calibrated. "This is a private ceremony." "I can see that," Jae-won said. He walked forward, slowly, not rushing, not stopping, just moving down the aisle with the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided how this would end. The guests, Korean business associates, a few of Dominic's friends, 2 of Adaeze's lab mates who had come out of loyalty, parted instinctively. No one tried to stop him. When he reached the altar, he stopped. He looked at Dominic for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Adaeze, and something happened to his face. It was subtle, barely a shift in the muscles around his eyes, but she caught it because she had spent weeks learning the language of his expressions. It was pain. Real, undisguised, immediate pain. "Adaeze," he said softly. Just her name, nothing else. And that was the thing that almost broke her standing up. "Jae-won, you need to leave," she said, and was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I will leave," he said, "when you tell me something." "This is not the time." "Are you carrying my child?" The church went completely silent. Adaeze felt the blood drain from her face. Behind her, she heard the collective inhale of 50 people holding their breath. Dominic moved first. He stepped between them, and that was when something shifted in the air. Because Dominic's movement wasn't protective, it was blocking. There was a tightness in his posture that wasn't jealousy or wounded pride. It was something else, something strategic. "She is my bride," Dominic said, looking at Jae-won with an expression that held not fear, but something almost like triumph. "Whatever you think you know," "I know everything," Jae-won said, without raising his voice. "I know why you came to Seoul, Dominic. I know what you've been building. And I know exactly why you chose her." Adaeze looked between them. What is he talking about? Neither man answered immediately, and that silence was its own kind of answer. "Stay with me, right now, because this is the part that changes everything." Adaeze had believed Dominic was a businessman with Nigerian-Korean connections. What she had not known, what she had not thought to investigate because she had been too tired and too desperate and too busy surviving, was that Dominic Choi had a very specific reason for choosing her. Not because she was struggling, not because she was alone, but because she was connected to Han Jae-won. Dominic was not a simple businessman. He was the front face of a rival network, the back organization that had been trying to find leverage against the Han family for over 2 years. Direct confrontation had failed. Business sabotage had failed. Legal pressure had failed. So they had shifted strategy. Find the weakness. Find what Jae-won cared about. Use it. Dominic had been watching Adaeze for weeks before he approached her. He had known about her connection to Jae-won before she even realized she was in love with him. He had watched the relationship, waited for the break, and then moved in at exactly the right moment. Marrying her wasn't about convenience. It was about control. A child, Jae-won's child, in the custody of a man who worked for his enemies, was the most powerful bargaining chip in Seoul's underworld. Not because they would hurt the child, but because Jae-won would never risk the possibility. He would negotiate. He would concede. He would give up whatever they asked to keep that child safe. Dominic had played a very long, very careful game, and he had almost won. Jae-won laid it out in that church without drama, without volume, in a voice that stayed level even as the words he was saying dismantled everything Dominic had spent months building. Adaeze stood and listened and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She had been so careful. She had been so strategic. She had thought she was protecting herself. She had walked straight into the most dangerous situation she had ever been in. "Adaeze." Jae-won's voice pulled her back. He had turned away from Dominic entirely, which was itself a kind of devastating dismissal, a statement that said, "You are already handled." He was looking only at her. "I need you to step away from him. Right now. Please." The please was what destroyed her. Han Jae-won did not say please. Not to anyone. Not ever.
She had heard him negotiate, command, redirect, but please was not in his vocabulary. Until now. "Why should I believe you?" she said. Because she was Adaeze Okafor, and even in the middle of the most chaotic moment of her life, she refused to move for a man without asking the right question. "You shouldn't believe me," he said. "You should believe what you already know. About him. About how fast this happened. About why a man you met 3 weeks ago asked you to marry him." She had known. Somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the fear, she had known it moved too fast. She had known the kindness was too perfectly timed. She had just been too desperate to let herself look at what she knew. She looked now, and what she saw on Dominic's face, now that the performance was over, now that the mask had slipped just enough, confirmed everything. She picked up the hem of her dress. She stepped down from the altar, and she walked to Jae-won. What happened next was swift and ugly in the way that things involving powerful men and serious consequences tend to be. Dominic did not let it go quietly. He made a call, right there in the church in front of everyone, and within 7 minutes 3 cars had pulled up outside. Men who were not his friends moved into position around the building. It was a message. You are not leaving with her that easily. Jae-won had anticipated this too. He had come with his own preparation. Outside the church, his people were already in position. Not a large show of force, because Jae-won never needed large shows. He needed precise ones. By the time Dominic's men reached the doors, the situation had already been neutralized in a way that left everyone present but no one escalating. It was a standoff managed by 2 men who understood each other's language of power. "You're going to walk away," Jae-won said to Dominic quietly, in Korean this time. "Because if you don't, what I release to the financial authorities tomorrow morning will end not just your operation in Seoul, but everything the Baek family has built in the last decade. I have been patient with this situation. I am done being patient." The air in the room was thick enough to cut. Adaeze watched Dominic's face cycle through calculation, fury, and finally something that looked like a man accepting a loss he didn't know how to swallow. He left without another word. The guests scattered. Priya appeared from somewhere near the back and grabbed Adaeze's hand without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. Jae-won turned to Adaeze. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "I am absolutely not okay." "That's fair," he said. And somehow, in the middle of this absolute wreckage of a day, she almost laughed. They ended up at his penthouse, not because she was ready to forgive him or return to anything. She was very clear about that in the car, speaking through clenched teeth while still wearing the wedding dress because there had been no time to change. She went because she needed to sit somewhere that was not her tiny apartment where Priya would worry and she would have to perform being fine. He gave her a change of clothes without being asked. Dark sweatpants, an oversized grey shirt that smelled faintly of something clean and expensive, and went to the kitchen while she changed. When she came out, there was tea on the table. Not coffee, tea. She had mentioned once, weeks ago, that her mother made lemongrass tea whenever she was overwhelmed. She hadn't thought he was listening that carefully. She sat down. He sat across from her. "You should have told me," he said. "I know," she said. "I would have—" "I know what you would have done," she said. "That's why I didn't tell you." He looked at her. "I didn't want my child growing up in the middle of what you live in," she said. Her voice was steady,
but her hands were not. She folded them around the teacup. I didn't want to be dependent on a man whose enemies have names I'm afraid to Google. I didn't want to love someone and spend every day terrified of what that love costs. And yet, he said quietly. And yet, she agreed. The silence between them was full. Not empty, not uncomfortable. Full of everything neither of them was saying yet.
I'm going to be honest with you, he said,
because you deserve that, even if it's inconvenient. She waited. I have been trying to leave this life for 3 years, he said. The transition takes time. There are people depending on the legitimate parts of the organization. Hundreds of employees, business contracts, legal obligations. I cannot disappear overnight. But I have been building a path out. Quietly. Carefully. How long? She said. 18 months, he said. Maybe less now. That's a long 18 months. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at him across the table. This man who was too powerful to be safe and too careful to be careless, who had brought her Nigerian food in a Korean penthouse and listened to every word she said and let her walk away when she needed to, and who had come to a church today not with weapons or ultimatums, but with 2 quiet words and the willingness to absorb everything that followed. I'm 12 weeks, she said, in case you were calculating. Something moved across his face, something he didn't try to hide this time. Is the baby healthy? He said, and his voice came out slightly different than usual, slightly less controlled. So far, she said. Strong heartbeat. He nodded slowly. He pressed his lips together, and she watched Han Jae-won, the man Seoul whispered about, the man that made rooms go quiet, sit very still, and process the fact that he was going to be a father. I don't expect anything from you, she said automatically, because it was habit. Stop, he said. She blinked. What? Stop telling me what you don't expect, he said. I am not the kind of man who needs you to make it easier for me by wanting less. Tell me what you actually want. She opened her mouth, closed it. What did she want? She wanted her father to be healthy. She wanted her research to matter. She wanted to stop eating instant noodles and sending herself into debt while pretending everything was fine. She wanted to stop being so exhausted. She wanted someone to know she was tired without her having to perform being strong first. And she wanted, God, she wanted, this man sitting across from her to be simpler. She wanted him to be someone she could love without fear. She wanted the version of him that listened and showed up and brought her a goosey soup to exist in a world that didn't also come with enemies and danger and power that lived outside the rules. I don't know how to want things that aren't safe, she said finally. I know, he said. Neither do I. He paused. We have that in common. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because I want to know who's feeling this with me right now. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. They were careful, imperfect, frequently uncomfortable. Adaeze did not move into the penthouse. She went back to her apartment. She went back to her research. She had meetings with her advisor. She video called her mother and told her about the pregnancy in a conversation that lasted 2 hours and covered every possible human emotion before landing, surprisingly, on her mother saying, God works in ways that don't always look the way we expect, nay? She and Jae-won talked. Every evening, sometimes in person, sometimes on the phone late at night when she couldn't sleep, and his voice in the dark was the thing that finally made her breathing slow down. They talked about everything, Her childhood in Enugu, the dusty brilliance of Sunday afternoons at her father's house, the smell of her mother's kitchen. He talked about growing up in the Han family, the weight of expectation, the isolation of being surrounded by people who served you rather than knew you, the loneliness of a life where trust was a liability. They were, beneath everything, two people who had learned very early that the world expected them to be strong, and had spent years being exactly that, at significant personal cost. "Do you ever cry?" she asked him once, late at night over the phone. Silence. "Jae-won?" "Once," he said. "When my mother died. I was 17. I went to the rooftop of our building, and I cried for 20 minutes. And then I came back downstairs, and I have not done it since." She held her phone tighter. "That's a long time to be dry." "Yes. You should cry sometime." "I'll consider it," he said, in the tone of a man who would absolutely not consider it. "Stubborn," she said. "You're one to talk," he said, and she heard the smile in his voice even though she couldn't see it. Her father's condition stabilized. Not because of some miracle, because Jae-won, without telling her, had connected her family's doctor in Enugu with a specialist in Lagos, who had access to a newer treatment protocol that had been showing strong results. He had done it quietly, through 3 degrees of separation, so she wouldn't know it was him.
She found out anyway, because she was a biochemist and she asked questions and she traced threads. And when she confronted him, he looked at her with the specific expression of a man who had been caught being kind and was not entirely sure how to behave. "You should have told me," she said. "You would have refused," he said. "She would have. She absolutely would have." "That's not the point." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." He said sorry the same way he said please, like it cost him something real, like the words were not habits, but choices. She didn't stay angry. She tried, but she couldn't. What she did was sit with the strange, terrifying softness of being taken care of by someone who understood that she would fight it, and did it anyway, and accepted the fight as part of the arrangement. At 20 weeks, she felt the baby move for the first time. She was alone in her apartment, sitting at her desk, reading a research paper at 11 p.m. It was faint, barely anything, like a small question mark pressed from the inside. She went completely still. She called him without thinking. It rang twice. He answered immediately, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had probably been working, which meant she had probably interrupted something significant. "Adaeze." "She moved," she said. Her voice was doing something embarrassing. "The baby, she moved. I felt her." Silence on the line, a long one. "She," he said. "It's a girl," she said. "I found out 2 weeks ago. I was going to tell you in person. I was planning." She stopped. "She moved, Jae-won. She's real. She's actually real." Another silence. And then, in a voice she had never heard from him before, quieter than quiet, almost threadbare. "Are you okay?" She realized she was crying. She hadn't noticed when it started. "I don't know. I think so. I think I'm happy. I don't know what this feeling is." "I know what it is," he said. "What?" "It's real," he said. "It's just real." She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. Small, warm, alive. "I wish you were here," she said before she could stop herself. "I'm getting in the car," he said. "Jae-won, it's 11 p.m. "I'm getting in the car." He arrived in 18 minutes.
He knocked on her door, and when she opened it, she was still crying. Still in her research reading clothes, hair tied up unevenly, one sock on and one sock missing because she hadn't noticed it fall off. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped inside, sat on her small couch, and opened his arms. She hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then she sat beside him and let him pull her close, and he held her, quietly, completely, without saying anything that would break the moment, while she cried about things she couldn't even fully name. The fear and the love and the relief and the guilt and the exhaustion and the strange, ferocious joy of feeling something small and new and hers move inside her body. He stayed until she fell asleep. When she woke up, he was gone. But there was tea on the kitchen counter, still warm, and a note in his precise handwriting that said simply, "She has good timing. Rest today." The danger, when it came again, came quietly. It was not Dominic. He had retreated after the church, and Jae-won's intelligence confirmed he had left Seoul entirely, his operation dismantled by the information Jae-won had threatened to release. That particular threat was over. But threats had a way of multiplying in Jae-won's world. The new problem was older and closer. His uncle, Chairman Han Byung-soo, his father's younger brother, who had managed the Han organization's most sensitive operations for 20 years, had been watching Jae-won's quiet dismantling of the dangerous parts of the network with growing hostility. To Byung-soo, the transition Jae-won was building was not evolution. It was betrayal. It was weakening a structure that had survived through ruthlessness and power, and weakening it for what? For a foreign woman? For a child? He had decided to act. What he chose to do was not dramatic. It was surgical. He arranged for Adaeze's research visa to be challenged through an administrative contact, paperwork irregularities, documentation questions, in a way that could, if not handled correctly, result in her deportation within 60 days. It was a message. Leave quietly, or this gets worse. When Adaeze got the notice from the university's International Affairs Office, she sat in her advisor's office and felt the ground tilt. 26 weeks pregnant. Research at a critical stage. Her father finally stable. Seoul, which had felt like enemy territory when she arrived, and had slowly, unexpectedly become something close to home. She didn't call Jae-won first. That was important. She called the university's Legal Resource Center. She gathered her documentation. She built her own case with the precision of someone who understood bureaucratic obstruction because she had navigated it her entire life. Then she called Jae-won. He listened to everything she said without interrupting. "I'm handling it," she said at the end. "I have a solid case. I just needed you to know." "I know," he said. "Don't fix it for me," she said. "I won't." A pause. "But Adaeze, this came from inside my family." She absorbed that. "Your uncle?" "Yes." "Does he know about the baby?" "Yes." She thought about that. About a powerful older man who saw her child as a problem to be relocated, who saw her as an obstacle in a succession of authority she hadn't even known she was standing in the middle of. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Handle it," he said, in exactly the same tone she had just used about her visa. She almost smiled despite herself. "Don't do anything that puts you in a worse position," she said. "I won't." "I mean it." "I know," he said. "Thank you for meaning it." What Jae-won did was this. He called a meeting of the Han organization's senior board. Every legitimate director,
every key figure in the transition he had been building. And in that meeting, he made it official. He formalized the transition plan, set a binding timeline, and announced, in front of witnesses who would make it extremely costly to reverse, that his daughter, not yet born, would be raised outside of the organization's darker structures, and that anyone who attempted to use her or her mother as leverage would find themselves facing the full legal and financial force of everything he had spent 3 years quietly building. He was not soft about it. He was not emotional. He was a man who had spent his entire life learning the language of power, and he used it for the first time for something that was purely, completely, not about power at all. His uncle backed down. Not happily, not permanently. These things were rarely permanent, but enough, for now, in the way that mattered. Adaeze's visa situation resolved through entirely legitimate channels within 3 weeks. Her documentation was flawless, her case was strong, and the challenge had no real legal merit once examined properly. She handled it herself. She was fiercely clear about that in the retelling later. Jae-won let her have that. He understood the difference between support and removal. He was learning. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning in late November. It was early, 4 weeks ahead of schedule, the kind of unexpected arrival that sent everyone scrambling. Adaeze woke at 3 a.m. with contractions that were already 5 minutes apart and called Jae-won, who arrived at her apartment before the ambulance did, who rode with her to the hospital with her hand in both of his, who sat in the waiting area for 4 hours when they wouldn't let him in, and who, a nurse later reported, did not move from that chair a single time. When they brought him in, finally, and placed a very small, very red, very loud girl against Adaeze's chest, he stood beside her bed and looked down at this new person with an expression that made every nurse in the room find something in the far corner to look at so he could have a moment. "She's angry," Adaeze said, exhausted, watching the baby's face. "She's strong," he said. "What do you want to name her?" He had thought about this. She knew he had thought about it because he had texted her 3 weeks ago at 1 a.m. with Soyeon. It means gentle and shining. But only if you like it. She had replied, "I like it." "Soyeon," he said. "But only if you also want her to have something from home." Adaeze looked at him. "Chisom," she said. "It means God is with me." "Chisom Soyeon Han," he said. "Han," she said. He looked at her with those dark, still eyes. "If you'll allow it." She was crying again. She had cried more in this pregnancy than in the previous 5 years combined. She was going to have words with herself about that later. "I'll allow it," she said. He bent down, this man who stood straight in every room he had ever entered, who carried authority like a second skeleton, and pressed his forehead very gently against the baby's. Chisom Soyeon Han blinked up at him with newborn's dark, unfocused eyes, and made a sound that, improbably, was not a cry. It was something softer. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and tell me, did you think they would make it here? 3 months after Chisom was born, Adaeze's father came to Seoul. He came for 2 weeks, a visit that was supposed to be short and became longer because he got comfortable, because Jae-won's guest suite was warmer than a hotel, because there was something about watching his daughter move through this city with a child on her hip and a life that was bruised but thriving that made him want to stay close a little longer. He and Jae-won had one conversation alone. Adaeze didn't hear all of it. She was in the kitchen with Chisom, but she heard the end. "She is not easy," her father said in the matter-of-fact tone of a man describing the weather. "I know," Jae-won said. "She will argue with you about everything. She will be right more often than is comfortable. Also known. And if you hurt her..." "I know," Jae-won said again. Quiet. Steady. No promises he couldn't keep. Just acknowledgement. Just, "I know what this costs. I know what I'm asking to be trusted with." Her father was quiet for a moment. Then, "She has been carrying things alone since she was 17. Since I got sick the first time. She learned to need no one." "She's unlearning," Jae-won said. "Slowly," her father said. "Slowly," Jae-won agreed. Another pause. "She chose well," her father said finally, gruffly, like the words cost him something, even if she took a strange road to get there. Adaeze, in the kitchen, pressed her face against the top of Chisom's head and did not cry. She was getting better at that, marginally. She defended her research 6 months later, passed, with distinction. Standing outside the examination room afterward, thesis in hand, official congratulations still ringing in her ears, she called her mother first. Her mother cried immediately, before Adaeze finished her first sentence, and then she called Jae-won. "I passed," she said. "I know," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you prepared for 6 weeks without sleeping properly, and you are too precise to fail something you have prepared for." She stood on the pavement outside Yonsei University and laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and tired and relieved. "You have an insufferable amount of confidence in me." "Yes," he said. "I do." "Jae-won." "Yes?" "Come take me somewhere. Chisom is with Priya. I don't have to be anywhere for 3 hours." "Where do you want to go?" She thought about it. "Somewhere with food. Real food. Not instant noodles. Never instant noodles again." "I know a place," he said. 20 minutes. He took her to a restaurant she had never found on her own. Small, quiet, tucked into an alley in Insadong, run by an older woman who recognized Jae-won and didn't make a fuss about it, which was how Adaeze knew it was somewhere he actually liked. They ate too much. She told him every detail of the examination. He asked real questions, the kind that proved he had read her research summary, all 40 pages of it, which she had never sent him, but which had clearly made its way to him through channels she chose not to investigate. "Stop reading my work without permission," she said. "No," he said. "Jae-won, it's brilliant," he said simply. "You deserve to know that someone who cannot be accused of bias thinks so." She looked at him across the table. The candlelight, the quiet, the city outside, Seoul in autumn, a city she had arrived in exhausted and alone, and was somehow now leaving in an entirely different shape. "The fellowship is ending," she said. "In 2 months. I've been offered a position, a research role at a biotech firm in Lagos. Good salary, good work, close to home." He looked at her steadily. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I wanted to tell you first before I decided." The fact that she had told him first, the fact that she had wanted to, that was something she noticed even as she said it. A year ago, she had made every decision alone, not because she had no one, but because she had decided not to need anyone. And now, here she was, voluntarily bringing him into the decision before she made it, not because she needed permission, but because his presence in the decision mattered to her. That was the shift. That was the quiet, real, important change. "I think," he said carefully, "that you should take any position that makes you happy. I think your work matters, and I think—" He stopped, picked his next words with that careful deliberateness she had come to love. "I think Seoul and Lagos are not as far as they used to be for people who want to close the distance." "That's not a plan," she said. "It's the beginning of one." She looked at him. "Are you going to follow me to Lagos?" "I'm going to build something in Lagos," he said. "The pharmaceutical distribution network has been looking at West African expansion for 2 years. This would accelerate that." "Don't build a business in my city just to stay near me." "I'm not," he said. "The business case is sound. I'm just telling you that the timing is convenient, and I intend to use it." She should have been more resistant to this. She knew that. Any sensible person would have been more resistant. But she was learning, slowly, imperfectly, against the full force of her own ingrained self-sufficiency, that there was a difference between needing someone and choosing them. That love in its fullest form was not weakness dressed up in soft language. It was two people who were completely capable of surviving alone, choosing not to. "You would need to meet my mother," she said. "I'm prepared for that. She will cook for you, a lot, and ask you too many questions." "I look forward to both," he said. "She will also pray over you, loudly." A pause. "I will manage," she bit back a smile. "And my sisters will interrogate you." "How many sisters?" "3. Something flickered across his face. "3. "You'll be fine," she said. "Probably." He looked at her across the table with the full weight of those dark eyes, all that quiet attention, all that careful restraint, all that controlled power that had slowly, over the course of a year that had broken and rebuilt them both, been shown to have something underneath it that was not performance or strategy or inherited authority, but just a man who loved someone and was learning, word by word and choice by choice, how to say so. "Adaeze," he said. I'm going to ask you something." "Okay. And I need you not to give me the first answer that sounds safe." She looked at him. "That's an aggressive request." "I know." He reached across the table, placed his hand over hers. She let him. "Stay," he said. "Not in Seoul specifically. Not in any one place. Stay. In the life we are building. With me, with Chisom, even with your 3 sisters and your mother and her loud prayers." A pause. The smallest pause, in which she saw something he almost never showed. Something open and undefended. "I am asking you to stay." The candle between them flickered. She looked at his hand over hers. She thought about the bathroom floor of her Mapogu apartment, about the church, about the tea on her kitchen counter and the note in his handwriting, about her father's voice. She chose well. About a baby girl who blinked at him with unfocused newborn eyes and made a sound that wasn't a cry. She thought about the fact that nothing about this had been easy or safe or planned. That she was a biochemist from Enugu who had come to Seoul to do research and had somehow come out with a daughter, a doctorate, a father whose health had stabilized, and a man who read her research in secret and arranged treatment protocols from 3 degrees away and said, "I know," like it was a complete sentence. She thought about the cost of holding yourself apart from everything that could reach you. She thought about how tired she was of paying that cost. "You're going to have to get used to being disagreed with," she said. "I know. Regularly. On many things, including things you are objectively correct about. I understand. And I will never be the kind of woman who is quiet about what she needs." "Good," he said, and he meant it. She turned her hand over under his, laced her fingers through his, felt him exhale slowly, quietly, like something he had been holding for a very long time had finally been allowed to release. "Stay," she said. He blinked. "That's my answer," she said. "Stay, both of us. Whatever that looks like, Lagos, Seoul, wherever Chisom eventually drags us. Stay." He looked at her for a long moment. And then, Han Jae-won, the man who had run 1,000 rooms, who had made choices in silence that most people couldn't carry, who had spent 17 years dry and controlled since a rooftop he could probably still find in his memory, smiled. Not the small, controlled version she had seen before. A real one. Full. Unguarded. The kind that changed his whole face. She thought, there it is. There's the one he saves. "Stay," he said. "Stay," she agreed. Later, months later in Lagos, in her mother's house that smelled of jollof rice and pepper and something warm and deep that Adaeze had been missing without fully knowing it, she would watch Jae-won sit on the floor of the living room, with Chisom crawling determinedly toward him, while her mother stood in the kitchen doorway, giving him a look that said she was not yet fully decided about this man, but was willing to continue gathering evidence, while her 3 sisters sat on the couch asking him questions in rapid-fire rotation and laughing when his composure cracked slightly around the edges. She would watch all of this from the doorway of the hallway, holding a glass of water, and feel something settle in her chest. Not perfect, not without its complications. His world still had edges, her work was demanding, the road ahead was imperfect and long and full of things they couldn't predict. She had her eyes open. She always had her eyes open. But real, solid, true. Her mother would appear beside her silently, the way mothers appear when they know you need them, and she would put an arm around Adaeze's shoulders and look at the living room, at the man on the floor and the baby who had reached him and was pulling herself upright using his knee with an expression of great personal triumph. And she would say, quietly, in Igbo, "God works in ways that don't always look the way we expect, ne?" And Adaeze would lean her head on her mother's shoulder and say, "I know, Mama," and mean it, finally, in all the ways she had once been too guarded to. Because this is the truth underneath all of it. Underneath the church and the secrets and the danger and the long, winding, imperfect road they had walked to get here. Sometimes the thing you run from is the thing that was always running toward you. Sometimes love doesn't arrive soft and simple and safe. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of a church, in a quiet voice, saying, "Stop." And you have to decide in that moment whether you're brave enough to listen. Adaeze had been brave her entire life in the ways that kept her surviving. The hardest thing she had ever done was learn to be brave in the way that let her live. And it was worth it. Every single difficult, terrifying, imperfect step. It was worth it. If this story moved you, if you felt it somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave me a comment. Where are you watching from? And what part hit you the hardest? I'll be back with another one. Stay with me.